From Michigan Production Alliance, this is INFRAME. I'm Barton Bund.
And I'm Mark Adler. This is another one of our community safety dispatches.
From home. Yeah, we are at home still at this point.
And we haven't had one for a while, right? So this would kind of be a year-end dispatch.
Yeah, well, it's the end of 2020, and we're on the cusp of 2021, and it's a moment of big unknowns. I would say, would you agree that this may be the worst year in the history of our industry?
I would have to say that we're seeing impacts that will continue rippling at least for the next year.
So let's talk about that. I mean, what do you out of all the safety things have gone further than just masks. They've gone further than protocols. It went into brand new rules within the industry. It went into big industry practices that were extremely tough on some people, not affordable for a lot of productions. So things are in a weird limbo. Where do you see things? What do you think are the steps to getting us back to work sooner?
Well, I think we have to start at the beginning, what it was like, what the experience was like at the beginning of this, where suddenly, there were no productions, and then suddenly there were. And in order to make that happen, the entire industry, talent, SAG-AFTRA, IATSE, AICP, they all had to get on board very quickly and create rules and plans in order for people to get back to work on projects. And that happened. Okay, now we have a plan. But one of those parts of the plan was getting tested. That's a major building block of the plan. And there were no tests available initially. How do you get a test? You go to a hospital, you go to an urgent care. This was not defined, so we had to figure that out early on. So now, here we are at the end of the year, and people can now get tests. And it just depends on how those tests are provided, whether you're a commercial or a feature film, and who the insurance company is, I think.
And what about the efficacy of these tests in relation to our schedule is such that, the test is supposed to take, let's say that the test takes 3 days. The test can take longer than 3 days. The test can be, the test can be hard for some people to access. And as a result, if you don't get the test and you don't get the right test result, then you're not working. But how's that all? I mean, how do people factor all that in? That's very chancy, isn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, personal experience is that, you can go into a place and get the rapid test and the PCR test. And now we know the names of these things. And they're supposed to be a 24-hour test. And you don't get them in 24 hours. You do get them in 3 days. But the problem really is that you're already working by then. You are already at work when the tests come back. So if someone is positive, then they're kind of walked away from the job.
But they've already brought the exposure. I mean, they've already potentially exposed people. So, yeah. And at that point, the production has to shut down. And I think what we're all trying to avoid, everybody from Tom Cruise to to commercial production in Detroit or Southfield, Michigan, we're all trying to avoid having to shut down the whole thing because we can't get insurance in many cases for this. We can't there's such a gamble right now with production.
That is, and it affects everybody. I mean, the non-union productions are barely complying with these protocols. It's expensive to buy PPE for crew, so they expect them to have it. And they're young guys, they don't even know, they're not certified. IATSE, at least, and I think SAG-AFTRA are also requiring certain things to actually go to work. So
the requirements that are involved, and for one thing, there are people who think that they can skate it and avoid the expense. And I would just say to anybody who's a non-union or an independent production, just wait. I mean, if you wanted to do it right, it's going to be very, very expensive with all this testing. It's going to add It could add. I'd say that let's just say that you could do your same project again later. Probably save that 20% of your, like that 20% increase or something.
That's right.
So I would, I mean, and that who, I'm just guessing, what the expenses might be like on some of these. But if people think, well, we'll be okay. Nobody here's been exposed. We're just going to do things our way. Why do you think that it's any different for a small production than it is for a small film production than it is for any business? I mean, like, I don't see why people are in a rush. I just don't understand. But I understand that people have a desire to keep on going and that they feel as though they should. But now is just a very, very tough time. There are very few types of productions that can even operate at any kind of effective level right now.
Right. That is correct. And we've heard things on the news about various projects all around the world, some successful, like the one right here in Detroit, No Sudden Move,
Yeah.
where they teamed up with a WSU, that is Wayne State University, epidemiologist who set it up for them, and Stephen Sondheim, Soderbergh rather,
Yeah.
He understood this, having made the film Contagion.
Oh God.
Not too long before.
I watched Contagion right in the middle of, maybe back in June or something like that. I'm like, I better just watch Contagion. And I think that film was prescient. That film talked about things that we're dealing with now, like the antibodies and it was almost like it was a scenario for what we're in now. And then, from my understanding, Steven Soderbergh he initially said, I don't want to make a film right now. I just can't. These constraints are too big. And this is going to be very expensive, isn't it? And they said, well, let's go ahead and do it. And you can sort of like create a new way of working. And he said, okay, then let's do it. And they worked with, apparently their safety department the folks who authored the white paper were on the safety and the AD department. It was, I heard that safety was incredibly good on that. And I've wanted to hear bits and pieces just so I can hear, how many people are in a van? What's the distance like? What's the mealtime like? What is that like from in all these departments? I think it's absolutely fascinating. And my hat is off to them because they succeeded at it. I mean, that is just such an achievement, I think.
That's right. I mean, even on that film with all their protocols, people were removed from various bubbles, if you will. They just weren't there. They got a phone call. Those that were exposed to that person that had a positive result, or even a false positive in some cases, suddenly weren't there. HIPAA rules, just require that nobody know. But if somebody doesn't show up to set, you kind of have an idea.
So yeah, it becomes but as far as I know, different from another case that I heard about, and that commercial production was working by a lot of its own rules, in a way a different set of rules that weren't the same as what the union was asking, right? And so as a result, there were a lot more kind of glaring errors that occurred, and outbreaks of COVID on sets.
Yeah, right. Yeah, we've seen that, and we've heard about those things. And I've just been reading about AICP. I don't know for certain, but it sounds like they are initiating rules like IATSE, like SAG-AFTRA. In IATSE, for example, I have to have a card. I have to have a certificate. I have to pass a training trust course in this field. But it's not perfect.
No.
Not perfect. Means, here's an example, and it's kind of amusing. In the training trust video that I was watching, they were using a thermometer by Ryobi, I think it's called. It's an industrial tool that's used to check thermostats and furnaces and that sort of thing. Well, it's got a laser to help that. But in the IATSE video, they were showing people using that device. And I bought one of those, because I didn't know and nothing else was available. And I was reading the instruction. It says, no, you will not get an accurate temperature if you don't use a laser, and you can't use it on a human. So it's not a perfect training situation. People are learning, just like this document that we're making today. It's a living document, all these protocols that are being developed.
Well, and there's something exciting about working on a cutting edge of something. There is change afoot. And do you think that, I mean, we have a lot of things to discuss in terms of getting back to work. But don't you think there are a few good practices that are coming in now that might improve safety overall in general going forward? That there are certain things that we're taking into account now that maybe had been taken for granted in the past. That maybe, you know, some of these protocols may be, you know, kind of here to stay.
Oh yeah, yeah, and right, and we're waiting to see what sticks, you know, after this is all over. Some things will be necessary. People will find, like, locations, for example. You know, I've worked in some really messy, unsafe locations in the past, and really had little say. What am I going to do? Call VOSHA or OSHA and say it's not safe, and maybe 2 days later, when we're on, they'll be there. So now someone's going to do a risk assessment, and they're going to determine whether or not that location is safe for not only, you know, human safety. Well, I've got to rephrase that. Not only for COVID, but for just general safety.
General safety. Yeah, I've been on some nasty Detroit locations that were just like, and I got so sick after a while of working. Like, God love that Packard plant, but I was pretty sick of dealing with, like, what am I breathing in? You know, I mean, there were plenty of times where I'm like, this is a cool looking thing, but I've got to, what am I going to have to do after this is done? You know, I mean, the contaminant, the idea that contaminants are there, I think that's in everybody's mind now. If I go in there, what is my risk? And
Right.
now that goes into the whole planning of an entire project.
Right. So we've talked
Yeah.
films, but there are also broadcast productions and general event production. And these productions have changed immensely. I mean, things that might not have happened for a couple of years yet in terms of remote production. My field, video assist, for example, it's got to be streamed. You've got to let people look on their phones now. But you know, not everybody's going to get a village to look at. Not everybody can watch those monitors, so they watch it on their phone now. It is streamed.
Is there some cool new technology that you've been able to check out? Is there anything that you are now going to be adapting to with what you're doing so that that's more possible?
Still experimenting. There are various devices, streaming devices that basically go from HDMI from a device to USB in a computer that would then send it out, that sort of thing. Various video assist packages have various devices. I mean, it's just changing constantly. Live View, for example, is also a very good unit that flew off the shelves in April and May. It's not a very expensive package. It's portable. You can broadcast from anywhere in the world using that device on a cellular, 4 cellular signals to be, you know, to just get it right, or plug in. So you're hardwired.
It's fabulous. That means suddenly you're able to save, you know, if you're producing a commercial, you're able to, you know, the marketing department, the client can actually be in another room or another, you know, they can be at home.
Yeah, right.
You can start to, you're reducing the number of people that are on the set, and thereby reducing the risks. I mean, and cutting costs way down, I would imagine.
Right, right. I mean, you're having producers Skype into the job, so you just, you know, bring your laptop or iPad over and say, well, how's this look? And, you know, they make a determination in their homes, you know, another state away. So
And
a lot of things are changes. And what's the question? Yeah.
how are we anticipating the impact of vaccines? You know, after that first, you know, after the general, whatever stage we get to when most of the general public has got access to these, including many industries like our own. How's that gonna affect things right off the bat? I mean, that's gonna be an interesting moment too, isn't it?
It is, and we're right about there because we have a vaccine, you know, several vaccines out. They're working out the logistics of those vaccines, and it's still slow because it's not federally managed, it's state managed, state by state managed. So we've got to get the vaccine to people, and production crew, well, we're not first on the list. We're probably 4th wave.
Yeah.
So getting the arms is going to be an issue. But then, okay, you know, we've got testing right now, and then you've got the vaccine. So people know how to do the testing. What happens when is tested and people still want to go to work. Do you get a test and a quarantine, or rather a vaccine? How do you prove that? So the concept of the vaccine passport has been discussed in the news and in trade magazines. And we're starting to hear that might be required for air travel. And certainly productions do air travel, so that'll affect that. But what will it be? Will it be a paper document, or will it be something that people are actually used to? I mean, they carry their cell phones with them everywhere. So would it be an app where they can be tracked, and for the testing as well as for the vaccine?
Well, what is it now? I mean, what do you get now if you're lucky enough to or needing the vaccine right at this moment? What do you get when you walk out of there? Do we have anything?
Well, that's a good point. So the testing has been again different depending on the production. If it's an urgent care that you're getting your test at, some kind of a system has been set up by the production company, and you go in there and give them either a number or a and they're paying for that test. In other cases, let's say the Detroit Symphony Orchestra, the way they do it is by working with Henry Ford's system. So Henry Ford does it, and best idea, best plan, 2 days, you get it back. If you have a My Chart, and most people have a My Chart from somewhere, you don't have to have a doctor at Henry Ford to get this test, but you just sign up for My Chart and you can see the result.
Excellent.
So it's may not be fast, but everyone gets a piece of paper, or their company that they're working with gets a document saying that they've been tested and which way it's going.
And folks who have had the vaccine will have an easier path to returning to work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and so we're getting into a whole I do expect that most people are going to get this, and most people are going to comply with that as well. But that's the re-entry into the workforce it's going to require that. I mean, it's going to be that. I think it's going to if you and I think it'll be a good moment, because at that point, what changes then? The onset protocols will be bound to change as well at that point, right?
Right, that's true. But we have to figure out what the efficacy of these tests are going to be. Already we're hearing that people have COVID even though they've had at least their first vaccine.
Okay.
You've got to go back and get your second vaccine too in some of these cases. Like I think the Moderna is a two-doser.
Okay, so we're keeping our eye on that, and I'm glad to see that our unions are also keeping their eye on it. Has IATSE, what's the communication been like with DGA, IATSE? What are people saying? I mean, what's been on everybody's mind? What's still missing? Because the white paper is a changing document. That means we're out there working with a changing document that we know isn't perfect. We know that the protocols aren't perfect, and that the gear and things can go wrong. So what does the DGA, what does Marvin Towns have to say about things like this?
Well, Marvin has been on calls. He's consistently on calls, and they're developing a plan. And they're concerned about the efficacy of the vaccines, again, for that reason, because, do you get tested or not? What is this passport going to look like? How are people going to relate to it? And will privacy issues come into play? Will the ACLU get involved for whatever reason? Because HIPAA rules are being violated every time, a positive test is being given out to a production company.
Yeah. So it's how the information is then transmitted and what we do with it. And don't you have a responsibility to turn your information over? And wouldn't you want to? I don't know. I mean, it's just, we're going to get into a lot of that. All these things are going to delay the restart of production, right? I mean, figuring out all these things means it's going to be a little bit longer before we really get back into the full swing of things, right?
Sure. And the bubble system helped out with that quite a bit, because contact tracing is not, up to the ideals that it should be. I've walked into a coffee shop and they give you a pencil and a piece of paper and say, just write your name down here. It's really not, compliance positive.
Yeah,
You can,
that's pretty wild, but like but at least it's something. At least it is forming a
yeah.
that Starbucks paper trail is going to be useful. I got that app, that app that can show if you've been if there's somebody who's been in the area who's been exposed or anything like that.
I'm not understanding that app very well because I've had it for as long as it's been out and I don't see anything.
Nothing's ever come up. And I'm like, oh, good, but what if that's just? I just think that we're working from an incomplete set of data for one thing.
Yeah, and truly, like there was one situation that I was involved in. I was tested. I was working with a new company. I insisted that everyone get tested. I asked the question, is everyone being tested? And they said, yes, our people get tested, every week. So that's fine. So I walked into the job. I did 2 days. And on the third day, we were off getting ready for the next week's production. And I got a call that someone tested positive.
Oh, wow.
Now, I knew mine was, negative, but, they couldn't tell me who it was at that time. I did find out later who it was, and it turned out to be a false positive as well. But again, that's after having worked on various sets.
What was the message? What message do you? This was a question that came up between when I talked to one of our great COVID safety officers, and he said we had this, somebody, we didn't find out until later that somebody had tested positive on a commercial shoot. What do we do? Yeah. And I said, well, you're going to have to. The producer is responsible here. The producer is the only one responsible, and you as the COVID officer, you're meant to be working independently. You don't need, like the producer has to take responsibility here and take care of all this stuff and send out messages to people. So people would have to receive an email that says you've been, there was a case, we had a positive we didn't know about till now.
If it's a commercial or it's a feature film, the COVID officer, the safety department is going to be calling them on the phone, messing with email. We're making a phone call, and you're gonna get a phone call if you tested positive, and the people that were very close to you are going to get a phone call, and they're going to be taken off the job. And if that's the case, in some situations, like on a feature film, you may be just put in quarantine for a period of time, and paid. But in other cases, you're put in quarantine for, I think it's 10 days now. 14's the ideal. And you can't return to work until you get 2 negative tests in some cases. Mm-hmm. So it just depends.
And yeah, but the AICP rules were different in terms of testing. They just were, right? I mean, testing was not always required because we weren't operating within the same union regulations, right?
Well, it's kind of difficult. I think there's a lot of overlap because IATSE works on AICP jobs, mostly feature films. So there's got to be overlap there. And I'm not exactly certain what that overlap is, but I'm going to look into that. And it
created a lot of confusion and gray area when it came to how the public understands these things. Because you were literally, it was like operating under the same circumstances, but the same kind of, it's still a shoot, it's still a commercial shoot, but you're operating as though you're in just a soft, it's a softer set of rules is what it seemed to me. It wasn't quite the same. So to me, it was risky to me. And especially when I heard some of the cavalier attitudes of some of the folks who were working on that too, because in the end, again, I'm an actor, so I'm the one who has to take off a mask. And so I'm the one who's gonna breathe it in. Whatever's in the air, I'm gonna breathe it in, good or bad, positive or negative. And when people were like, well, things happen, life is dangerous, I said, no. This is the movies, man. This is the world of, we have control over this environment, and shouldn't we take every single precaution imaginable to keep our people safe? Because what is there without our people? Christ, it was just I didn't understand where people were going with it. It was almost making the commercial is more important than having people to make the commercial.
I've just heard that in most cases the actors are treated, very delicately. No one's going near them without a mask and a shield, not, and, maybe even the whole, plastic hazmat suit in some cases. So, and they're going into the wardrobe trailer, and that trailer is being sanitized by wardrobe department. They're being taken care of all through the mix and right onto set. So the only possible issue, and the biggest issue that has been, is what they do after work. They're not going out to eat. There's not many places to go out to eat. So they're just hanging out with family. That's why a lot of shows are quarantined, like No Sudden Moves was. They were staying in a hotel. Others went home, crew members went home, and they would just
Everybody
be.
in that A zone was meant to be kept contained.
Right, right, right.
So,
That's right.
speaking of, so Tom Cruise is making Mission Impossible 7
Uh,
in Europe, and his bubble. I thought this was a great. I loved Tom Cruise at this moment for how he set this up, because Tom Cruise is a one-man studio in a way. He's a producer, movie star. He's kind of like, he's unique in the industry because he's just kind of like a cornerstone of the industry all on his own. He's out there making another big, and his projects have huge stunts and safety and effects and big set pieces throughout.
The moolah. Yeah.
Oh yeah, a lot of money, but he spent £500,000 of his own to keep the entire show on a cruise ship nearby, and then there was this incident. So out of all the expense and out of all the trouble and out of all the stuff he's going through right now to make this show happen, and he is kind of like also his own COVID officer on set. I hear he actually carries the big 2-meter stick around and is just like, hey, split up, you're too close. But he yelled at some people, and that became, and I read the transcript. I didn't hear the audio because I could hear his voice as I read it, and anyway. But people were, that became a controversial thing. I was hoping all the way along that we would get a big celebrity to come in and speak up about on-set safety.
Yeah.
I didn't know we were going to get the big man. I didn't know we were going to get Tom Cruise to jump up on a couch for us. And I'm like, now that we have it, I'm not so sure we want it, because he's a controversial figure in a lot of people's minds. But in this case, I was like, Tom Cruise is right. Tom Cruise he's absolutely right. His investment, the insurance, the safety, all that stuff is way up in the air. And so his words saying, hey, if you don't follow it, you're effing fired. I was like, well, what are you going to do about it?
Right. We don't know what his day was like before that, because the delivery was not so great.
Right.
It was very harsh, and that's fine. And maybe that was required, but there's many ways of dealing with this, but I'm sure that he's got a lot of pressure on him, and the news media certainly didn't understand this. People that understood where he was coming from.
Yeah. If it had been another producer, if Shonda Rhimes had come out and like told everybody, like in her huge industry, or if another major like studio owner / if Tyler Perry had come out and done it, everybody had been like, right on, that was great.
Yeah.
Safety first, that's great. But the fact that it was Tom Cruise meant that everybody's feelings about Tom Cruise suddenly came back, and so I'm like, okay, guys, I don't really understand the Church of Scientology. I don't like what they do, all that. I think that he's I totally have followed his career since the 80s, so I know a lot about him. But in this case, like, what he's talking about, if we can separate it down to just the onset safety thing, the concerns that he was expressing and the ferocity in which he was expressing it shows where we're at. That one of the only he's one of the only games in town. He's Tom Cruise. He's making a Tom Cruise movie, Mission Impossible 7. It's huge. It's one of these huge productions, and we're talking in the 350 million, half a bit, maybe $1 billion that you'd need to break even on this thing. And if he had to stop production, he just loses a lot. I mean, this is a very, very expensive proposition. So even if he went about it, see, people get yelled at on film sets. That's another thing that people don't realize, is that you do something wrong on a film set, especially a safety thing, you probably get yelled at. You know,
Yeah,
I hate to break it to you,
yeah.
but it's
Mhm.
true. If people are spending all this time and all this money setting up something so that you can do something that looks really dangerous safely,
Right.
you're gonna get yelled at, probably fired. Yeah, you probably are.
Well, yeah, if you're working around special effects and you step on one of their cables, you get a little education.
Yeah,
You know,
it's gonna happen, and it's gonna no. But I'm
uh,
saying that people get yelled at all the time. People get yelled at over the garbage can liners, that they're using, and and catering. I mean, like, there's things I've seen. I've seen just about everybody. Not that it's right. Not that I think you should get yelled at, but I understand the heavy. It's a time pressure, it's a money pressure, and it's a job pressure, and especially now with something that is literally a matter of life and death. I'm like, okay, I understand why people are just looking for something to get upset at Tom Cruise about, but in this case, I'm sort of like, thanks, man. Like, you just spoke up and you put the fear in people, and like, I'm not saying that's the way to do it. I would do it differently, but these
well,
people have been. It's not, safety is not something you want to learn on the job. Safety is something that you should need to know before you arrive.
and I'm glad you brought that up because the other end of that spectrum on a lot of other jobs that are maybe medium budgets, whether it's a commercial or a independent film, they've got people that aren't really sure of what they're doing. They may have had a certificate online and they now are called a COVID monitor, something along that line, or a PA is put into that position and they're given a stick, maybe not. They're just, kind of using their arms to do it. And you've got that. I worked on a job where a pediatric nurse was on the job as the COVID officer. First job that she'd had. And she was taking temperatures, which I thought was great. She was handing out PPE and all that. But throughout the day, she was clueless. She was trying to, give sanitizer to people when they were working,
Yeah.
when they were shooting. So, the director, and they don't have the power. These COVID officers, in many cases, do not have the power to change things. Now, on some of these feature sets, they do have a lot of power. They're telling people, hey, get back,
Mhm.
do that stuff. But on other jobs where they're just getting paid whatever it is, $300 a day, um, they can just suggest.
And there are people taking these jobs who, the education needs to be. I just, me personally, my preferred COVID officer would have medical background, would have a lot of production background, would
Right.
have general safety knowledge, would have general, like, would really understand how sets operate, would also really really understand the safety of the actors. They would know the rules in and out, and they would be there. They would be there to protect the employees, all of them, and they serve the dual purpose of helping, with the production's overall liability. They're helping keep the production in line, to keep it a compliant set. But it
Yeah.
shouldn't be that they're just on the side of the producer, keeping the producer's nose clean. I think that's been that people have. There are COVID officers who who aren't performing the real task.
That's it.
The real task is keeping people safe, and
Yeah.
and that means keeping, no contact. That means keeping the masks. That means keeping clean. That means all that stuff. It is not just some service that you can sign off and create a checklist to give to the producer to give, to put into their records. It is not just to protect the employer.
Right. That's true. There are COVID officer forums on Facebook and in reality, and they are doing great things. They're giving people information in real time. So that's a great thing. And this thing again is growing and it's getting better. So
That's good to hear. You believe that?
I do believe COVID officers are getting better. Yeah.
Well, and our overall industry awareness has gotten a lot better. And I just want to really salute the people who are doing it right. I don't want to point out people who are I don't want to just look around and say, hey, they're doing it wrong. I do believe that there are very innovative people who have been able to work during this time, but there are a lot of people who have continued to work at this time, when they hadn't had everything in place. And it's very expensive. It's very logistical. It's very man. It's a tough. It creates a different I think that working with masks on with all these new things creates an entirely different working dynamic, don't you?
Oh, it does. I mean, from the time that you walk on set, whether you have a staggered call to, having to wear the PPE that they require, which may be double masks and face shields, to dining, from your craft services, which is nowhere near what it was. It's a candy bar, it's a breakfast bar. There's no coffee on set. You have to bring your own. And having lunch, you're not, there's no camaraderie there anymore. You've got to be 10 feet apart at least. And, when eating, and that's the most dangerous time actually that I've heard, when people are eating, the masks are off.
That's so all the fun stuff is like gone too. The social aspect is like, it's a very utilitarian environment now. It's just like, get the job done and get it done quick.
That's right.
And so that becomes the thing. And so it becomes, it can create a tension there that doesn't always, I'm sure, lead to the best outcome, the best product. And also it leads to people, tension is so high that, people do get yelled at for doing things wrong all the time. And
Right.
it's sort of like, you don't have, it's not a thing like later on you talk about. It's like something you have to handle right then,
Yeah,
right on the spot.
that's true. And, working with a mask on is not an easy thing to do, let alone double masked or with a visor. Those face shields are not easy. Some fit better than others. They don't like bouncing around. And when it's hot outside, it ain't fun. But in the wintertime, I got to say, wearing a mask helps.
Oh,
Keeps
it's
you.
not bad. Yeah, and in the face the winter in Michigan gets so cold that your face hurts. So like
Yeah,
that will help provide some protection.
I can tell you that. That's right. I can
Well, I mean,
attest.
it's absolutely amazing. I had this really funny when I was doing a little more safety research. I ran across this guy, and this is so funny. I was on one of these. I got off Facebook recently because all I do when I'm on Facebook is debate the efficacy of masks. That's all I do with people. It's just like masks work, and they're like, no, they don't. I'm like, okay.
Who's part of the system?
Yeah, and so I met a guy who felt just like I did, but he was even more kind of like angry about like people not wearing masks and people not following the industry regulations. And I got to talking with this guy. We hit it off, and we start messaging, and he tells me that he works crews on a lot of things, but what he does about half the time, he's in LA and he does adult film.
Oh,
And I think from what I've gathered, especially out in LA, I've talked to quite a few people who have just had some of that experience working on crews in that part of the industry. And so there is this, like, it's not talked about, but it's there. And this guy tells me, he's just like, man, the porn industry was trying to be like, they were trying to speak up about this like back in October of 2019. You know what I'm saying? The porn industry was already like speaking up and saying, we can't, hold on, like there's something going on here and we should shut down. All of Hollywood should shut down. And so Hollywood dragged its feet quite a bit, but I'm waiting for the big expose on how the porn industry was impacted, to the extent, this is so amazing, that many of the well-known celebrities from that world became incredible advocates for COVID safety.
who knew? That's crazy.
Well, it is, but like but since that's an industry where it's all about contact, and it's all about you can't really have a COVID safe scene. It's really hard to do, and so it changed the dynamic quite a bit. And of course, here I am. God, I can't believe I haven't made any jokes yet, but I was putting together a whole list of things, and every time I was putting together my questions, it turned into a porn joke accidentally. It was like, who blew the whistle?
Even on soap operas, changes were made. Were you aware of that? They brought in a husband or a wife, and it's a look-alike for the kissing scene or for the close contact scene. So the husband and wife, or the of the actors,
Or a mannequin. That's what I was talking to some people who do intimacy training, and they were training for their intimacy, which I think is a the IDC thing is the whole that's an entire I think I got that IDC, but that's an entire subject all on its own, is the intimacy
Sure.
that's going on. And I think that that's going to be another, when production resumes, I imagine that a lot more people will have that training, and that'll be great. But yeah, I talked to intimacy training people, and they're like, "Yep, there's a whole way of doing things. You know, where you know, when it comes to kissing, when it comes to intimate contact of any of that kind on screen, you know, in the Me Too, in the Times Up era, you want a department dedicated to that, just like stunt safety."
Sure.
And you know, this person was describing this to me, and I said, you know, but we're we found the safest thing, of course, is to be kissing a big rubber dummy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? I'm an actor, you know, and I don't want to kiss a big rubber dummy. I mean, that just can't look right. It can't. That's a close up. That's an intimate moment. You can't fake that. And so, what production in the midst of, there's so much simulating that I've seen that has to go on with production right now, because we have to simulate the kiss. Can't do it. Have to simulate the contact, the lunch scene. Even you can't even shoot, you know, two people sitting at a table perhaps. So you're simulating in this way so that it looks like two people are there, but in the end, it feels disjointed. And so production that's happening during this time has a certain, the safety aspects that people have coordinated and brought into creating, it leads to a certain aesthetic that is a bit distant and is a bit colder.
Sure. So last 5 minutes of this series here for this year, 2020,
Yeah.
one thing that, you know, to an extent, some productions are going out of the country where New Zealand, no cases of it. They can actually shoot.
Mhm.
Iceland, they can actually shoot. There's no COVID. So, you know, they're getting something done. They have to rewrite their scripts, possibly. They have to pick that other one up that they weren't going to do for a while, but they're shooting out of the country.
This whole thing, Mark, you know, like what I'm noticing is that the whole entire industry is just redesigning.
That's right. That's what
That's
I'm
an
saying.
incredible moment that we're at. And so when things begin again, things will begin anew. It's not going to resemble what it was. I think a lot of people who are just going to be returning to work, they're going to be amazed with the way it looks.
Right. And we thought early on when we discussed these things that this was going to be an outlier year. It might tend to be 2 years that we're talking about. So
Oh man,
that,
I hope it's not. I hope we can pull together, but you know, I just feel like safety is a way that everybody can come together. Safety is a uniting idea for our industry, and I hope that we can get the support, and we can get it together, you know, as quickly as we possibly can. It's been an amazing year, Mark. It's been amazing to walk this through with you.
yeah, I'm glad you're safe. I'm safe.
Good, good. And let's keep up on it. You know, I want to make sure that, you know, I feel like our outreach has been, you know, we're trying to get people on the same page with all this and keep everybody as current as possible. So how do we learn more? How do we find out more, Mark?
Look in the comments. We're going to put this on MPA's YouTube site. Look in the comments for information that we pick up through this through the end of this year. Posted. We'll come back in 2021 and see where we're at with another safety dispatch.
All right. Until then, I'm Barton Bund.
I'm Mark Adler for INFRAME.